This is the American dream of freedom on wheels. An automotive age, traveling on time-saving superhighways.
The expansion of the United States interstate highway system through the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 was a turning point in the geographic distribution of people and economic resources in the U.S. By allowing the upper and middle class racial majority to live farther away from cities, it accelerated the construction of suburbs. This turning point in urban development left a significant number of low-income, minority-inhabited neighborhoods in cities. A decrease in investment impacted these neighborhoods, causing economic isolation and increased poverty, an unintended consequence of interstate construction. In 1908, half a century before the Federal Aid Highway Act, the introduction of the affordable Ford Model T caused car ownership to increase, leading to demand for more and better roads. Military need added to demand in 1919, when a convoy of vehicles assessed the mobility of military forces by traveling across the country. After the convoy experienced hundreds of accidents, Lieutenant Colonel Dwight D. Eisenhower wrote, "Extended trips by trucks through the Middle West are impracticable until roads are improved." By World War II, Eisenhower was commander of the Allied forces. In Europe, he saw how well-maintained and large highway networks, such as Germany's Autobahn, made military transport more efficient. Later, Eisenhower wrote, "The old convoy had started me thinking about good, two-lane highways, but Germany had made me see the wisdom of broader ribbons across the land." By this point, most politicians agreed that a highway system was necessary because of uneven road quality and lack of a continuous interstate network. In the late 1940s, Congress selected highway routes, but due to controversy over funding, they did not designate a financing plan. In 1952, Eisenhower was elected president. He strongly advocated for the expansion of the highway system. President Eisenhower said,
"We are pushing ahead with a great road program that will give us the types of highways that we need for this great mass of motor vehicles. It will be a nation of great prosperity, but will be more than that. It will be a nation that's going ahead."
A modern highway system is essential to meet the needs of our growing population, our expanding economy, and our national security.
Eisenhower did not see the previous highway bills passed by Congress as sufficient. In 1956, after continued debate, a House committee proposed a bill that was the first to sustainably finance a highway system, and the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 passed almost unanimously. Interstate construction lasted from 1956 to 1991 and expanded the highway system by 41,500 miles. Although interstates were originally intended for long-distance transportation, people began to use them for commuting. The 1956 Act unintentionally accommodated and encouraged a growing suburban lifestyle. In the early 20th century, there had been some suburbs just outside of cities, made possible by limited mass transit. After World War II, suburbs continued expanding due to a growing demand for housing. Developers mass-produced affordable single-family homes outside of cities. The newly extended network of highways made expansive suburbs more viable, because people could easily access cities for employment and commercial purposes while living farther away. A resident of Richfield, a Minneapolis suburb, in the 1960s said,
"The highways have been a positive for Richfield because they put Richfield in a geographic position where someone living there could get to downtown Minneapolis very, very quickly."
In addition, white Americans in many urban areas saw suburbs as an opportunity to flee the increasingly racially heterogeneous cities, in a phenomenon known as white flight. Suburbs prospered as large numbers of people moved out of the cities. Not all city dwellers were able to move to the suburbs. Starting in the early 20th century, an influx of African American people coming from the South in the Great Migration caused a demographic shift in northern cities. They went north to find work and escape segregation, but found mainly low-paying jobs due to discriminatory hiring practices. As a result, urban neighborhoods with a substantial population of racial minorities were generally made up of low-income residents. Many minority residents could not move out to the growing suburbs because of exclusionary zoning practices. Many higher-income residents and city officials saw low-income neighborhoods as slums because of their dilapidated housing and higher crime rates. Some city officials sought to remedy these problems through post-World War II urban renewal programs and viewed highways as a potential tool. The government took over properties so highways could be constructed in their place.
So most freeways went through or right along the edge of minority communities. The wealthy communities could block the freeways.
That political decision wiped out and extinguished my dream and the dreams of other people like me, and it extinguished a bright light of a community.
Said a resident of Rondo, a predominantly black neighborhood in St. Paul, large portions of which were demolished to make way for Interstate 94 in the 1960s. A Rondo resident and community activist said,
Interstate 94 dislocated a lot of stable, well-to-do African-American families. It had a devastating economic impact. It went right through the heart of this community. And that happened in most urban areas around the country.
Low-income neighborhoods also endured long-term consequences of highway construction. Banks limited or denied financial services to residents of undesirable areas due to racial prejudice and expectations that investments would not be profitable. This process, known as redlining, continued for decades. Disinvestment in the form of redlining affected larger portions of cities after highways were built, as the concentration of low-income residents rose. Without investment in the form of loans or insurance, neighborhoods were unable to develop, contributing to economic decay. In addition, as the population, especially of higher-income residents, decreased in central cities, the tax revenue of these city governments greatly diminished. Although there were some high-income neighborhoods within inner city limits, the concentration of wealthy residents was higher in suburbs. By 1990, the average family income in the central city was approximately $31,000, while in the suburbs it was approximately $42,000. Consumer businesses generally operated in higher income areas because they had many customers who could afford to pay higher prices.
You saw a significant migration first of residents, then of stores following them, then of jobs and employers following the workers.
For suburbanites, trips to shopping malls and other suburban businesses began to replace trips into the cities.
The most notable change was that cities were losing share of the market to suburban retailers.
A decrease in business investment in the cities led to fewer jobs and increased poverty. For example, from 1958 to 1965, employment in the Minneapolis area grew only 3%, while employment grew 39% in the suburbs. This lack of economic growth, reflected throughout the United States, affected cities into the following decades. Today, highways continue to contribute to urban sprawl, as third and fourth ring suburbs develop along highway routes. Highways divide American metropolitan areas in both racial and economic terms. Suburbs remain significantly wealthier than the inner cities, which continues to affect urban areas. With the increase of cars on the road and concerns over military transport, it became apparent by the 1940s that the United States road system needed improvement. Through a series of acts in the mid-20th century, culminating in the 1956 Federal Aid Highway Act, an efficient and effective highway system was developed. While not its original intent, the act had a profound economic impact on many inner cities by contributing to suburban development. This prompted a turning point in American geographic distribution as population and wealth moved out of urban areas. Inner city residents suffered from business and bank disinvestment, the effects of which are still seen today. Cities declined as suburbs flourished, an unforeseen consequence of interstate construction.